we should move on and continue our conversation with movies, but we're going to talk about movies on streaming. And specifically, we're going to talk about Apple TV Plus because some interesting developments have been made with Apple TV Plus and their movie strategy as it relates to some of their upcoming projects, but really just like Apple TV Plus as a streaming service, which is it's existing in a really weird place to me. Like Apple TV Plus it's such a strange streaming service because first and foremost, Apple is literally $1 trillion company. It's the most valuable company on this planet. And they decide we want to get into movies and entertainment and streaming. Not that they need to, just because like they wanted to a few years ago. And I think a lot of people wonder what that would look like. And they also made a very interesting choice to not go the route of other streaming services and not license out titles. You know, they weren't going to be like Netflix or Max or even Disney Plus and license out things. They were going to build a completely original slate of programming. And I remember at the time thinking, that's a horrible idea. Nobody's going to sign up for that. Like that doesn't make any sense. Some of that is still kind of true, but at the same time, in those 5 or 6 years since they launched, Apple TV Plus, for me personally, has put together the best slate of programming that I've seen pretty much from any streaming service in terms of original stuff. I think I like more projects from Apple TV Plus than any other streaming service. Certainly more than Netflix. Certainly more than Disney Plus. The only one that's really giving it competition is probably HBO Max. That's it. But Apple TV Plus has put out some really, really great stuff that I've enjoyed a lot, that I talk about a lot on the show. But their movies have been in an interesting, weird state. And we've talked about several of their movies on the show. Last year, we reviewed Killers of the Flower Moon. We reviewed Napoleon. We reviewed Argyle. I talked about Fly Me to the Moon a couple of weeks ago. And recently, it's come out that one of their future movies, Wolves, which is going to be starring Brad Pitt and George Clooney, it's getting reshaped in terms of what the strategy is, because you might have gone to the movies over the past few weeks and you might have seen a trailer for this film because they were going to put it in theaters like some of those other movies that we just talked about. However, according to Deadline, Apple has changed its plans, and Wolves will now have a wide theatrical release, but a very limited run when it was going to have a much longer run initially. It's going to have a limited theatrical release. It's going to happen on September 20th, and then it will debut globally on Apple TV Plus Friday, September 27th. That's important to know because this hasn't happened. When we heard about Killers of the Flower Moon and Napoleon, we knew those were going to be in theaters. They never told us when they were going to go on Apple TV Plus. And so you kind of had to make a choice. If you really want to see the movie, you go see it, or you just kind of wait in limbo to figure out when it was going to be on the service. Now we have a clear-cut picture, and this is going to be limited. Killers, Napoleon, Argyle, those ran for weeks and weeks and weeks. Now Wolves is only going to run for 1 week in theaters. And Apple confirmed that they are pivoting to this release, but sources state that it doesn't necessarily signal a change in its hybrid strategy of streaming releases as well as wide theatrical releases. But Apple is going to stick with the wide theatrical release for another upcoming Brad Pitt movie called F1, which is going to be coming out next year. Have you seen the F1 trailer so far?
Oh my God.
That's at the top of the list of most anticipated for 2025.
It's gonna be hard to break that one right there.
That movie looks phenomenal.
It's so good.
The trailer is incredible. We Will Rock You, Queen.
My nerd senses are up. It's tingling.
So that's gonna be a great one that I'm looking forward to. But Apple stated that they're gonna ultimately make decisions based on the marketplace, because its recent release, Fly Me to the Moon, it didn't fare well theatrically at the box office. That movie cost $100 million. I think it's made like 40-something million so far at the box office. And it was released by Sony. You know, what they've historically done is take these movies, they partner with the major studio because they don't have the distribution power. They don't have the resources what these studios can achieve to get these movies to a large amount of theaters and people. But they do have another movie coming out, a Steve McQueen directed World War II drama called Blitz. That's also going to get a limited theatrical release on November 1st. And even, you know, with the Wolves movie with Brad Pitt and George Clooney, sources state that it was a crowd pleaser and it tested strongly. It's a really good movie. But ultimately, Apple felt that it was best that they ensured that they could have the biggest audience possible by mostly making this an Apple TV Plus release as opposed to a theatrical release. Because even with those other movies like Killers and Napoleon, they did okay at the box office, but they cost a lot of money. They cost a lot of money to make. But this is also happening in addition to a larger conversation with Apple TV Plus, because a report came out of Bloomberg that they're ultimately going to cut back spending. They've so far spent more than $20 billion in the past 5 years to produce original TV shows and movies, but nobody's watching this stuff. We talk about this all the time, and so now they're trying to refine their strategy. They're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars every year on original programming that gets a lot of strong reviews, that gets award nominations and looks, but in terms of attracting a viewership base, it's just not there. Even more so, the streaming service attracts just 0.2% of all TV viewing in the United States.
My God.
So Apple TV Plus generates less viewing in 1 month than Netflix does in 1 day. Think about that. That's crazy when you've spent $20 billion. A drop in the bucket for Apple, yes, but still a lot of fucking money. And apparently the studio spent more than $500 million combined on the movies that we've talked about, from Martin Scorsese, from Ridley Scott, and from Matthew Vaughn. That would be Killers of the Flower Moon, Napoleon, and Argyle. And they also spent upwards of $250 million more on the World War II miniseries Masters of the Air, which I talked about earlier this year. So a lot of information there, a lot of stuff to digest. We've circled conversations about Apple, but I thought it was really interesting to talk about this because this has an adverse effect on movies that are not only made, but movies that will be seen by people, movies that are get released in theaters, and just a general conversation around this. And I even saw a lot of people who I don't think historically would tap into these conversations. They would see these reports about Apple cutting back on this spending, and they would say, like, well, they don't market these things. I didn't even know about this show or that movie, and this should be more of a conversation about how to reach more people. First, let's start with the movie piece of it, specifically with Wolves, the strategy there, but really their larger strategy with films, because we've seen those movies, we've talked about them, and they haven't, again, not been the most successful from a box office perspective, and varying degrees of quality. What do you think about Apple potentially pivoting away permanently from putting movies in theaters and I guess becoming like most other streaming services and just mostly making films for the streaming service, even if it gets maybe a 1 week release in theaters limitedly?
So I understand, I think, wanting to be like, all right, we can't do this anymore. Let's pump the brakes. We got to go pure streaming kind of feel. But I also feel like they haven't tried all they should try, if that makes sense. Like, I understand a lot of this is experimentation, in finding out what the numbers look like and what return looks like and all of that. But part of me doesn't feel like they've had, I think, the right clientele of movies to I don't know, I think to test this better, like you said, they do have a couple of big ones, right, that we were talking about between Scorsese and Ridley Scott and Matthew Vaughn. But are those, I don't know, I'm just curious how those movies would have performed in the theater regardless of no matter what happened. Part of me wants me to see them try, I don't know, one other thing, something that feels more blockbustery than artsy, and then come back and see what that feels like, if that makes sense. Like, oh, we have this huge movie that's coming out. It's going to do this, and this. Maybe they thought that's what Argyle was. I don't know, but that's not what Argyle was. But part of me is like, experiment one more time and then dial it back. But I think overall, from a business standpoint, it makes a ton of sense. If it's not working for you, you tried this thing and it doesn't work, I can see why you would reel back into yourself. I can see why, when you're spending all of this money, these billions and billions of dollars, I can see why you would reel it back in and only want to spend so much on your movies, especially if they're not making the money that you expect them to make. So I really think part of me thinks it's like, dang, y'all didn't try that many times, and y'all tried with very specific artsy kind of directors. Maybe try one more time. Give even the strategy you're talking about with Wolves is like 1 week. September 20th, the movie comes out, and the 27th on Apple TV Plus. Like, to me, I don't know. It doesn't seem like a sound strategy to be like, oh man, we're going to make a lot of money in that week. To me, that doesn't make any sense. And maybe I'm looking for it from the wrong perspective. But I'm like, I don't know that if you tell me, let's say I'm a casual movie watcher, that the movie that come out this weekend is going to be on Apple TV in a week, I'm going to go watch on Apple TV in a week. I'm not going to go to the movies to go see that thing. So, like, yeah, I don't know. I wish, part of me just feels like they should because, like you said, it's dropping the bucket for Apple. I think they can afford to experiment a little bit more with their theatrical films, and they should try to do that. At least again, maybe 2 more movies. Try different movies. Try a longer, not 1 week release between when it's going to be on streaming and not. But yeah, I again, from a business standpoint, everything I think still makes sense. Cutting back that spending, and having those and maybe just having those movies for streaming. Because now, if your movie only costs $10 million to make, $20 million to make, you don't feel like you've wasted all this money and all this time on marketing and all those things. So yeah, I have to see it play out to see how the current one is going to, or the new strategy is going to go. But I still understand. I think coming back into yourself and reeling it back in when it comes to both your release strategy and your spending.
So this is somewhat complicated, just because, I mean, first and foremost with Wolves, it's getting 1 week because they are trying to minimize the theatrical movie going market. Like, the plan is to now go for a completely streaming only play for the most part. I would imagine the 1 week is to just appease the stars of the movie, George Clooney and Brad Pitt, because when they signed up for it, when it was a part of their package as actors, Apple probably promised them, hey, this is going to play in theaters. And this is also interesting because a movie starring George Clooney and Brad Pitt 20 years ago is immediately making a lot of money at the movies. But that's just not the case anymore. Things have evolved and changed, and we know that stars, especially stars that are aging, in their case, they're not in their prime anymore. That's not getting people out to go see a movie. It's just not enough. And we know what the trends are. We know exactly why that is. A lot of pre-branded IP is kind of the only stuff that people go to see now. So it's just also weird to think about, like, damn, George Clooney, Brad Pitt can't really open movies anymore. But also, is that true? Because if you put together the right package, like Ticket to Paradise with George Clooney and Julia Roberts, that does pretty decent. It makes over $100 million. It didn't cost that much. Or even a Bullet Train, Brad Pitt being in an action movie with David Lynch, and doing something that was like pretty original and different. Didn't blow up the world, didn't set the world on fire for a financial standpoint, but it did okay. It did decent. But these movies are also kind of like something else on top of just like their basic premise. And so it's weird, just like the marketplace that we exist in. I think that here's a couple of things. First and foremost, with Wolves, they also mentioned that they made a deal to make a sequel. They've now promised John Watts a sequel to come back and write and direct, and I guess they'll try to get Clooney and Pitt back to direct. I doubt that movie even happens. They probably just set that as a make good on this whole thing. And again, they want these guys to feel good. I'm sure Apple's all about relationships, because what's common amongst all their things that they produce from a TV or movie standpoint, they work with stars. They don't work with no names. They work with the biggest of the big names in Hollywood. That's what they're all about. But Hollywood's not a star-driven business per se anymore, and I think that that's a part of it. Now, in the case of some of those earlier releases like Killers of the Flower Moon and Martin Scorsese and then Napoleon with Ridley Scott, I don't think they regret those at all, even though they cost a lot of money and they didn't make a ton of financial return at the box office and weren't necessarily profitable per se. I don't think they regret those, because that wasn't really the point. Like, you're making a Martin Scorsese movie that's supposed to be important. That's always designed to be an awards play. That's always designed to be a critical acclaim play. And they achieved that. It's one of the best movies of 2023. Similar situation with Napoleon. Napoleon did get Oscar nominations, and it was recognized when it came time for award season. I think they're fine with that stuff. Like, they can eat the cost of production. If they make enough back to cover their marketing for the films, I think that they consider that a win, because they really probably are only concerned with, like, okay, we're going to spend X amount of money on marketing. If we can make enough back to justify that, then we're good. Now, Argyle, that's a different situation entirely. That's a movie that did cost $200 million, flopped at the box office, and it just wasn't good either, right? And so Apple is a company notoriously that does not like good. They don't like bad press. They don't like to be having bad headlines out there. They don't want people talking badly about their products or services. Like, they want to be in good graces with people. That's really important to them and their whole ideology. And so I think that really had them re-examining. And now Fly Me with the Moon, again, $100 million for what they made, it's not working. It's not doing good enough. Now I guess the next thing about this is with the films, and this pivot. Let's say that this just becomes the norm. Do you think that even in, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, do you think Apple is in the theatrical business at all? Because I would say Netflix is completely out. Like they don't do anything for theatrical. They might do a 1 week release, but I don't even count that. Like what they did with Glass Onion, that was also 1 week,
Yeah,
and
or
then it came.
Irishman.
Yeah, that stuff.
Yeah.
It's almost moot. They're just doing that. I think to appease people. Do you think Apple will continue to try to do hybrid stuff and maybe give some other things a shot in the future, or are they probably just going to peel back entirely and maybe go the Netflix route and just say like, yeah, we're just going to go for a complete streaming play moving forward?
Uh, I I think I would want them to, but I think they won't. If uh yeah, I would want them to. Again, I still have like a man. Can y'all figure it out? Like I see what y'all are trying to do. It just hasn't been working. But I could see them bound like a couple years. I could see them bowing out completely and just being like, yeah, we can't do this anymore. It's not sustainable. And yeah, we can't make anything from it. I don't know exactly what that looks like for them. Again, or if that helps them in the long run, and of course in terms of money. But I'm also thinking about how are they gonna get more subscribers? Is that a thing that's going to help them get subscribers potentially? You know, it could, but yeah, I'm really not sure. It's hard to tell. But I would want them to, but I just don't see them saying like, yeah, let's continue to do this thing that's not working.
I think that they will, just because they want to keep the stars happy and they want to work with these stars.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the stars in Hollywood, a lot of the talent, they do still want to feel important, and importance is equated to theaters. Like that's considered important when you put it on a big screen. You have mass distribution. You know, you work with the big studios, and I think that they'll do it. But they're not going to go all in, probably like they did with Napoleon and Argyle and things like that. I think it'll continue to be hybrid. And as I said, case by case, you know, there might be an example that comes out of nowhere where it's like, yeah, we're going to go full, theatrical release model here. But that probably is going to have to be a really special project that they really believe in. But, you know, this, for me, I think this all boils down to the cost of this stuff, like how much money they're spending. That's the problem. I don't even think the movies are the problem per se. I don't think it's necessarily the audience's interest in some of these things. I think it's just the cost. Like, okay, Napoleon, it's a lot of money, but you know, it's Napoleon. It's a big figure in history. You know, we're gonna spend a lot of money here. Martin Scorsese, okay, you're telling a pretty epic, sweeping story. Takes place over numerous decades. All right. Argyle, I know that this is supposed to be a big spy comedy, you know, with Matthew Vaughn and a lot of stars, and it's supposed to be sexy, but why is that movie $200 million? I think that's really the question. And even what they pay the stars, you know, reportedly George Clooney and Brad Pitt are getting $45 million a piece to be in Wolves, a piece. So we're paying two people $90 million before we've paid anybody else. That is not sustainable. For Apple, anything's sustainable, but that in reality is not something that you should continue to do. Yeah, as a business, that's just not good business sense, right? We understand you want to work with the stars, but damn, they are working the fuck out of y'all because they know like they can command those prices. But I don't think they should pony up and be balling money out like that. And they should probably look at what some of the studios are doing. And you know, I'm all for people getting their money. But at the same time, like, again, when you talk about sound strategy and what makes sense, like that's probably not the way to be going if you want to have a theatrical model that's going to be sustainable for the next few years.
Do you think they're like also afraid to lose some of that, I guess, premiere feel of their shows in movies if they cut back on costs? It's like, dang, this thing only costs 20 mil. Now does it look and feel like Apple TV Plus now? You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if that's like a whole nother part of this that's like, oh man, can we do that? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It's like a branding thing.
Yeah, branding, quality control, and I mean all of that. They're not gonna do things for cheap. They're not Lionsgate. You know, this is not the but yeah, less. Not cheap, but less, you know, and that's the conversation that probably needs to happen. Like, we understand who you are as a company, we understand the brand that you maintain. You don't get to where they are by accident. You get there by very strategic decisions and a lot of money that's spent on these things. But you know, we're talking about movies and TV. We're not talking about products and technology. These are not the same things. We're talking about a creative community that still has to be business successful and make business sense. But that might be a part of the conversation to where they are kind of concerned about the perception. Like, oh, we have to keep up. We have to keep up with the Disney Pluses of the world. We have to keep up with the HBO and the Maxes of the world. These things are increasingly just getting more expensive. But as I've said numerous times, there are no streaming wars because that conversation is long over just because of Netflix and how far they've pulled away. So everybody has to reassess what they're
That's
doing and how
true.
much they're spending. Which I guess is kind of the next point of it too. Just the fact that people are not watching Apple in general. Which I say it and I kind of say it in a vacuum on the podcast, but I'm not saying it just to like make a joke. It's really true when you look at the
For
data.
real.
Nobody's watching their stuff, and that's also another part of the conversation, which is kind of funny because even with the streaming first play for movies, are people still gonna even see the movies because nobody signed up for Apple TV
Hmm.
Plus? Like it's a weird place to be in, and so there was also another piece of the report that say the company has pushed back on the narrative, I guess, on sort of the analysis that they failed to capture the proper metrics that matter in streaming because Nielsen doesn't necessarily capture every device. They are somewhat limited, but also Apple, they invest in entertainment really to kind of sell devices. Like this is
Hmm.
almost a means to an end for them. It's like, okay, yeah, we're not necessarily here to make money in Hollywood. We're here to make really great stuff, but also at the same time educate people about these wonderful, amazing products we're going to come out with and create this bigger
Yeah.
ecosystem, which also has me questioning, like, that's curious and interesting. Like now we're making art for the sake of technology, which
Hmm.
um, you could argue Netflix is kind of the same thing in some respects, but I don't know. On a bigger scale, thinking about streaming in general, on a macro level, do you think streaming should be in the movie business at all? Because I do think we're talking about different things here. Like when streaming comes out with films, it's not the
Yeah.
same thing as what Hollywood does with the studio. So it's not the
Hmm.
same stuff. But streaming has permeated this conversation, and they want to make movies, and they want to get award nominations, and be at the Oscars. They want the same sort of halo effect that I think certain studios get. But now that we have kind of enough examples across all of them, from Netflix, Amazon, who just committed to like putting out 16 movies a year in theaters, to now even Apple TV Plus. Do you even think that this is something that streaming services should be in the business of doing, or should they stick to licensing content, on one hand, but then also just
Hmm.
producing original television streaming and maybe pivot away from doing original movies for their services?
Wow, what a good question. Because like you said, we have, I think, so many examples of that going successfully. We have successful Netflix movies that have show up at the Oscars. We have successful things on Amazon that have show up. Like it's just hard. It's hard for me to say because it's like, dang, okay, what if that thing didn't exist? What if that movie didn't exist? What if that didn't happen? And part of me without that would be like, yeah, they should just stick, because I was speaking with Netflix has so many bad movies. There are so many bad movies on Netflix. Oh my god, it's crazy how many bad movies they have. But the good that they do have is like sometimes it is a cultural moment, and it is like, dang, that might have been cool seeing that in a theatrical experience, because it's like, oh, like too far and in between sometimes does it feel like a streaming service cracks the code of, dang, this movie should have been in the theaters. It doesn't feel like it happens often enough. Like the consistency is not there, and I think that's what makes it hard for me to say yes or no, because when they do come through, it's like, whoa, I like that. That was good. Can you do it again? And oftentimes they don't. They don't do it again, or it takes them a long time, or again, it's too far in between. And so yeah, part of me just wants to say no, don't do that. But then it's like, okay, what about the one time? Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard thing, I think, for me to wrap my head around completely. So I'm right now with that question, I'm just going to say no. Like they probably should bow out. Maybe they shouldn't be in that conversation, or maybe they should distinguish a separate division for that, like, and not have it. If you're going to have a separate studio for theatrical experience movies, I think say that, call it something else. But then to have a movie on streaming that's coming from streaming kind of budget, streaming kind of studio, streaming kind of, all of that kind of stuff, keep it on there, keep it on something that people should watch on their phone. But if you want something, Netflix Hollywood or something, you know what I'm saying, if you have something separate for that, I think do that and make that your theatrical brand. But I think having it all in one is not the play and shouldn't be the play.
So I'll preface and say everything I say is really biased because I am not here for any of the streaming shit. I'm really not. So I just
Yeah.
want to just make that very clear for people that are listening. Um, what I will say is that there have been certain movies that only got greenlit and made because there was a streaming service ready to pony up the money to pay the filmmaker, the talent, whatever the case may be. And that has created opportunity. Technically, yes, it has. But in totality, really, what value have streaming titles from a movie standpoint done for the industry? I don't think that they've done anything. I don't think it's moved the needle whatsoever. Even the awards plays, even the movies that have been successful, quote unquote, from a critical standpoint, maybe like, really, Coda was the best movie of the year that year? Really? Was it the best movie of that year? Or did we just need something to make us feel good? Like, it's fine. It's a good movie, but
It's a good movie.
like, what the fuck are we talking about for real? Like, if we really just wrap our heads around that, like, come on, there's nothing better than that. And I just don't buy that. And outside of an example like that, or an Irishman, a couple of things that maybe Amazon has done. I mean, hell, I just watched Matt Damon and Casey Affleck are just randomly in a movie on Apple TV Plus called The Instigators that I thought was kind of decent. It was cool that nobody is ever going to talk about. It's going to just like vanish from history like it never happened because it's sitting right next to, you know, some random show that they probably have too. You know, I don't know. It's just like, why are we doing this? I know they wanted to compete. They wanted to be a part of that whole conversation with Hollywood. Movies are the more, I guess, quote unquote, prestigious thing to go after, especially if they're successful. That's really where you see the success. But we don't have any examples. And I said this a few weeks ago in talking about this. There are no cultural moments. There are no franchisable entertainments that come from streaming original titles. That has not yet to happen. Anything that has been something that's moved the needle has been in theaters first. It's a movie that's made for theaters, whether you're talking about Barbie or Oppenheimer or Top Gun Maverick or Avatar or Deadpool and Wolverine or Spider-Man No Way Home or the Dune Part 2s and Part 1s. Like, the list goes on and on. Things that resonate and live and have a life and are actually talked about. That's where they exist. Streaming has achieved that from a television standpoint, you know, with their TV series, but from a movie standpoint, I dare somebody to name me one. I dare you, and you won't be able to. So I'm just kind of sitting here like, yeah, don't make movies. Just don't make movies.
Some people will tell you Power of the Dog.
And that's just not true. That's just not true. Yeah, like 3 people watched it and saw it at the Oscars, but that is not a cultural phenomenon. That's not a moment. It's a wonderful movie, very well made, and deserved all the appreciation and attention that it got. And it could have been in theaters for 2 weeks, and it would have done the same exact thing. There was nothing specific about Netflix that made it even more special. Netflix or HBO or Disney, whoever you want to throw in that conversation, they don't have those things happen. They don't create moments. There's nothing still, even as few and far often as between as it happens, because it happens a lot less frequently now. There's still nothing that can compare to, hey, a lot of fucking people in the country are going to go see this movie at the same time. That we can't replicate that unless you just put out a movie that's going to resonate with a lot of people at the same time. So I don't think they should. They will continue to make movies. They're not going to pivot away from that. But I would say just kind of get out while you can. But you know, Netflix is far and away ahead of things. I don't know. Any thoughts just like on Apple TV and their offerings before we close out the conversation? Just like any thoughts? I mean, I know you've seen some things and just like looking at the numbers, like knowing that nobody's really watching their stuff while they're still producing these things. They have had wins like a Coda. You know, they are kind of the first streamer to win an Academy Award for a movie. That is something that they'll be able to own, but they still haven't gotten through, I think, to a large amount of people. You know, this chart that I put in the doc says that this year alone, people spent 33 billion hours watching Netflix stuff, and Apple TV Plus, it's 310 million hours on that scale, which is like, I mean, not even a fraction of what Netflix is drawing, right? And so it's a tough conversation to have in terms of like where they compare and where they rank, obviously compared to the other services. But I don't know. What do you think they need to do to be more competitive, to get more people to sign up and subscribe, to watch more of their stuff as we move into the future?
I think the most confusing thing for me is how is Apple have this whole ecosystem and people aren't watching their, you know what I mean? Like people are even listening to our podcast right now on Apple Podcasts, probably, or like on an iPhone.
Right,
So
right.
why aren't they clicking on the app? I don't like maybe yeah, I don't know. Like maybe Apple or maybe iPhone users, they need to give them some free stuff, some free trial, some months of like drive up those numbers a little bit, get people interested in what you have. You know what I mean? Like to get people engaged in your content. I don't know. Part of me feels like they're not doing some of that stuff. Like, are people even clicking on Apple TV to see what's on there and then be like, huh, that show looks interesting and clicking? Clearly not. They're not doing that. So part of me feels like, I don't know. Use the ecosystem you have. Part of me doesn't feel like, yeah, they're using some of that stuff.
Do you think they need to? Should they get in the business of licensing stuff? Like, should they pay a ridiculous amount of money for fucking, I don't know, Friends or Suits, or should they just pony up and pay that money to draw people in, create
Yeah,
visibility, and then maybe upon doing so, 'cause that's what Netflix did for the. I mean, I don't know if it's going to work now because Netflix has kind of mastered it for 10 plus years,
yeah,
but they
they
drew
did.
people in. And then they said, "Oh, but by the way, we have original stuff too that it might catch your attention, but we're going to get you here because we have some of your favorite stuff from yesteryear." But I don't know. Do you think that there might be a marketplace for Apple to do that to try to get more eyeballs on their product?
I mean, it would have been if Max didn't give all their stuff to Netflix first.
That's a
Max
good
done
point.
gave them.
Yeah, they did sell everything to
They gave,
Netflix. Yeah,
they done gave all that shit away.
because they looked at the
Shoot, and we
numbers and said
see
nobody's
Amazon
watching
too.
Apple. Yeah.
Yeah, they gave some stuff to Amazon too. So it's like I think that would have been the play. Like if they could have caught them before they went completely to Netflix, Apple should have stepped in and been like, "Look, y'all, we'll buy some of this stuff, bro." I'm Insecure on Apple. People would have been watching. I'm telling you, they would have been clicking on Apple TV after
But
that.
would they though? Would they? Like, I mean, maybe that is a
I don't
part of
know.
HBO and Max's strategy. They're like, nobody fucking watches Apple. We're gonna give it to the most
You can give
eyeballs
it to the most.
possible.
You're right.
It doesn't not make sense. It makes sense like why
Mm-hmm.
they chose them.
For
Um,
sure.
but I don't know if that is enough. I guess that's the bigger
Yeah.
question. Is it enough to just license something out and people will actually take that next step to say like, oh yeah, I will sign up and
Mm-hmm.
pay an extra $7.99 to watch that show that I really want to see?
No, that's a good point. It really is. Yeah, and I don't know if that would have been there, and that's why Netflix is so interesting. Because now, like you said, they mastered it. It almost feels like of course, people are going to watch it on Netflix. But when you get to Apple TV, it's like, who knows? You don't know what's going to happen. But I don't know. They should have tried something, but I think they still have the opportunity to do that. And I think if they don't want to water down their content and make it so like, oh, we have all this license some stuff, but we don't want none of this to be like, be picky. I mean, if you really want to, but at least you're doing something to get people to come to your service. But yeah, part of me just feels like they just need to do better at like, yeah, marketing their service and getting people to at least click on the app. and if that's licensing content, so be it. If that's giving iPhone users, Mac users, iPad, y'all got way too big of an ecosystem for people not to be clicking on this app and watching stuff, man. So like they got to figure it out.
Yeah, I don't know what that disconnect is between their products and this, but I don't know. I may they probably need something signature, something that's very much unique to them that you really can't get anywhere else, and that they do
Mm-hmm.
better than anybody else. Because awards attention is not enough. Because most people don't give a fuck about awards. Like nobody's watching award
Yeah.
shows anymore anyway, so they're not gonna know about Coda and Severance. Like they're not watching the Emmys and the
Mm-hmm.
Oscars, so that's not really doing anything. It's not moving the needle. But even like a Peacock, which is also not doing necessarily well, what they just did with the Olympics was phenomenal.
Really good.
Amazing what they just did with the Olympics. I mean, they bounced back in a huge way with their Olympics coverage. I mean, there was nothing that you could not see. If you wanted to watch everything,
Mm-hmm.
you could watch everything. And that moves the needle probably just temporarily, not necessarily for the long term, but who knows? They do have a large library of stuff, from
They
their
do.
different divisions that, if you signed up for Peacock just for the Olympics, maybe you might stick around for an extra month because you see like, oh, they have X, show that I want to see. They do have The Office. I'll just go back and rewatch that or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
But as I say all the time with the streaming service, everybody's fighting for fourth place at this point. Like nobody nobody is doing anything, and I think everybody does need to reassess, obviously, how much they're spending, because it's been gross amounts of money spent on this stuff, just way too much. And then 5 years later, everybody realizes, like, damn, this doesn't make any business sense to keep doing this. Like, it's just kind of crazy we ended up here. But I think it really took Netflix to pull so far ahead of the pack. It kind of took them to just like widen the lead so much that it's almost impossible to catch up, for everybody else to realize, like, yeah, we just can't do this. Like, we can't do
Yeah.
what they
Yeah,
do,
bow
because
out.
Netflix is synonymous with streaming. It's like Google,
Yeah,
it's the
it
word,
is.
you don't really say streaming, you just say Netflix, so that's
Hmm.
hard to compete with on any front. But it's an interesting conversation. It's interesting to sort of look at it and assess. But I'll be curious to see how things work out with the Wolves, feature film, which I'm super excited about. I can't wait to see the movie,
Heck yeah.
and definitely talk about it on the pod. And then, of course, everything else that Apple does. But if you guys have any thoughts, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.